It was a regular afternoon when a routine traffic stop spiraled into a shocking moment of confrontation. A young black teen, casually sitting in his car, was minding his own business when a police officer suddenly approached, unaware that this wasn't just any teenager. Without warning, the officer smashed the teen's laptop, leaving him in complete disbelief. But there was one crucial detail the officer didn't know. This teen wasn't just anyone. He was the son of the town's police chief. What started as an ordinary encounter quickly turned into a web of tension, mistrust, and a series of unexpected consequences. How would the officer respond when the truth comes to light? Was this an act of unjust aggression or a misunderstanding? This story dives deep into the complexities of race, power, and authority, with a twist that no one saw coming. Stay tuned as we uncover what happened next. The officer, a middle-aged man with years of experience on the force, had seen his fair share of tense situations. But this one felt different. There was something about the young man's demeanor that pushed him to act faster, more aggressively. The laptop, a simple device the teen was using for schoolwork, was now shattered on the pavement. The officer didn't know it, but this was no ordinary teenager. His father, the police chief, had worked tirelessly to improve the community's relationship with the department, but despite his efforts, there was still a significant divide between law enforcement and the residents, especially among the black community. The chief's son had always felt caught in the middle of these tensions, trying to balance his loyalty to both sides. But today, things were different. What would happen when the officer realized he had just destroyed the property of someone with more power than he ever imagined? Would it be the wake-up call everyone needed, or something much worse? As the officer stood there, staring at the wreckage of the laptop, he could feel the weight of his mistake slowly sinking in. The teen, still in shock, didn't immediately react. He simply stared at the shattered screen, his mind racing with disbelief. He had never imagined something like this could happen to him. Sure, he'd heard the stories, heard about the systemic issues in the community, the police brutality, the mistrust between law enforcement and young black men. But this was different. He was supposed to be safe. His father was the police chief. Back at the station, the chief was in the middle of a meeting when a phone call interrupted. He recognized his son's name on the caller ID, but the tone of the voice on the other end was enough to freeze him in place. His heart sank as the details unfolded. His son's laptop had been destroyed, and it was all the result of a routine traffic stop gone wrong. A traffic stop. The officer, meanwhile, was scrambling. He knew he'd messed up, but admitting it meant facing more than just a reprimand. It meant acknowledging the deep-rooted problems within his department, problems that many had ignored for too long. But could he afford to bring that reality to light, especially knowing the consequences it could have for his career? The teen was now texting his friends, trying to process everything. He had always kept his father's position a secret from most people, not wanting to be treated differently. But now the truth was unavoidable. He couldn't just let the officer's actions slide. Yet he feared the fallout that might follow. His father had worked hard to bring change, but could one mistake shatter all of it? Would he be seen as just another privileged kid using his father's power to get ahead? Or would this be his chance to stand up for what was right? The tension was building. No one knew what the next move would be, but one thing was certain: the incident wasn't going to stay quiet for long. As the night stretched on, word of the incident began to spread through the town like wildfire. Rumors swirled, accusations flew, and whispers of cover-ups filled the air. The police station was tense. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how this would play out. Some believed the officer had simply overreacted. Others whispered that this wasn't the first time his judgment had been clouded. But no one knew exactly what had transpired, not yet. The chief, sitting in his office, had been on the phone for hours, trying to figure out how to handle the situation without losing control of the department. His son's name carried weight, but so did his own. Would this be the event that brought everything crashing down? The teen sat in his room, alone, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He was furious at the officer, furious at himself for not speaking up sooner. But most of all, he was scared. Scared of what would happen next. If he went public, if he told everyone who his father was, would he be seen as a hero? Or would the media twist it into something ugly, portraying him as a privileged kid throwing his weight around? The thought of the cameras and the reporters descending on his family made him sick to his stomach. Yet, he knew deep down that he couldn't just let this go. Meanwhile, the officer was still trying to cover his tracks. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something was about to explode. He could feel the pressure building, every second driving him closer to a breaking point. If the truth came out, there was no going back. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for could be destroyed. But what scared him more was the realization that he wasn't just facing consequences for his actions, he was part of a much larger issue. An issue that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Would this moment force him to confront the reality of the department's culture, or would he do everything in his power to bury it? In the dimly lit corners of the police station, officers huddled, discussing their next moves, unsure of which side they should take. Loyalty to their colleague, or to their chief? The division within the force was becoming undeniable. The situation was spiraling, and no one could predict where it would land. All eyes were on the chief's son. Would he make the call to step forward, or would he stay silent, letting the storm pass? The uncertainty hung in the air like a ticking clock, each moment bringing them closer to an inevitable confrontation. And as the tension built, one question remained unanswered. The real question now wasn't whether the truth would come out, it was who would control the narrative when it did. The tension reached its peak that evening, when the police chief finally made his public statement. The press conference was packed, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions from every angle. The chief stepped up to the podium, his face stoic, but with the weight of 1,000 thoughts behind his eyes. His son stood off to the side, a silent figure, unsure of what would come next. The moment the chief opened his mouth, a ripple of unease spread through the room. "I've been made aware of the incident involving my son," he began, his voice calm but heavy. "And I want to make it clear that the actions of the officers involved are being fully investigated. No one, no matter their position, is above the law." The room fell silent, waiting for the next words to come. The chief's stance was firm, but the unspoken tension was palpable. The press was hungry for blood, and they were ready to tear into him, to tear into the entire department. But the chief wasn't done. "I'm also here to announce that an internal investigation has uncovered another layer to this situation, one I did not foresee. The second officer involved was not just a witness, but an active participant in escalating the incident. This officer is now under full investigation as well." A collective gasp echoed, but just as the crowd began to buzz with new energy, another revelation came in. The second officer, the one implicated in escalating the incident, was found dead in what the police were calling a suicide. The twist left everyone reeling. Was it an act of guilt, or was there something darker at play? As the story broke across the news, the chief's son stood there, staring into the camera, knowing that while the fight wasn't over, the first real step had been taken. The system was broken, but now there were people ready to fix it. However, the final unanswered question lingered. Who was truly pulling the strings behind the scenes? And what would they do now that everything was exposed? The fight for justice was far from over. In the days that followed, the investigation intensified. The police chief's transparency and his son's courage ignited a wave of change within the department. Several officers came forward, offering testimonies that painted a picture of a system built on fear and corruption. The higher-ups who had been pulling the strings were eventually exposed, one by one. The department was shaken to its core, but for the first time in years, real reform seemed possible. The teen's decision to speak out became a turning point, not just for his family, but for the entire community. His father, now more determined than ever, pushed for deep-rooted change, working alongside activists and local leaders to rebuild trust. Though the road ahead would be long, The first steps were finally being taken. As for the officer who had caused the incident, he was held accountable, facing the consequences of his actions. The lesson was clear. Justice would not be silenced, no matter who was in the way.